Nafisa, I don't know if you've met Mauro. Mauro's one of our clients here. So he and I just started to have a conversation on kind of KPIs, expectations, things like that for team members. But Mauro, Nafisa is our intern here at the firm, and she's been with us since March.
Yeah, since March. Yeah.
She's been doing some of our marketing and such as well. So I don't know that you guys have had the chance to connect before, but yeah. So now you get to meet a little bit more of our team as we continue to grow out.
All right. Very nice meeting you.
You too.
So so back to that. How we've started to kind of look at it, and this is one thing that we've looked at. It's not necessarily right or wrong, but we look at the difference between acquisition of clients versus servicing of clients in terms of how we compensate. And we've been talking about this more as we continue to look at bringing on additional coaches, things like that. What does that look like? And it goes to, for the servicing side, retention becomes kind of a big piece. The expectations are around you're keeping the clients for 90 plus days. The retention beyond 12 months is whatever percent. So some of those are part of kind of how we look to compensate. And then ultimately from a monthly recurring, what piece of that can be the additional compensation piece, whether that's bonus, that's commission, whatever it is on a monthly or quarterly basis. It's kind of how we've looked at it from that standpoint. What part of that pot can they come into? But that's different from bringing on new clients. So when a business development leader brings on a new client, they essentially get a piece of the first month, and then they don't get recurring after that because they're always looking to generate new business. And I know that there's other firms and models similar to how we're set up that have gone that route, but really making that distinction between bringing on new clients versus servicing the clients, because it is a little bit different. There's acquisition versus actually keeping them long-term and compensating differently. It also then gives you the ability that if that role, as you continue to build out, if that needs to split, you actually have somebody just responsible for bringing on new clients versus just taking care of the clients, then it's a little bit easier to split that. Okay. So that's kind of where my mind initially goes, is what are those responsibilities? And obviously the responsibility of keeping and retaining clients is worth something that's different than the value of acquiring a client and making sure that's separated out. Now, of course, the percentage wise, how much that looks like, that's going to vary by industry, by business, by experience. And that's why I asked the question of, what have you had that question on, or that conversation on expectations and kind of what they're looking to do? Can you help them get to where they want to go? But ultimately, they've got to do the work to get there, right? There's got to be that piece of, you're going to continue to build this so that you can live the life that you want to, make the income that you want to at this particular point. We're going to give you the path to get there, but it's ultimately going to be your responsibility to take ownership and be able to get to that point. Thoughts on that? Questions?
No, those are good points. I think there's a couple of components over there, right? I mean, acquisition and also the retention part. I mean, I think, the retention, I see it like, providing a good customer service, making sure that, what we told the customer, about the value of, coming in with us. I mean, that is key for the retention, because at some point in the process, this can derail, right? I mean, and they're going to say, well, I'm not really perceiving the value here. I'm paying too much, whatever, right? I mean, whatever excuse they're going to come and provide or give, and then some of those are going to be valid, right? I mean, but definitely retention is part of the equation. And so I think the only thought that I had on that is, what will be what's the average, or, I know you said that it depends on the industry, but what would be the average percentage then?
It's a good question. When we look at it, industry to industry, I don't know off the top of my head. From personal experience, looking anywhere from 15 to 25% of first month on kind of the acquisition piece of it, knowing that that's not ongoing. Yes, it costs more upfront as the business to bring on that client, but that lifelong value of the client obviously is there. The following month you're not paying out 25% of that to somebody else, but you might be paying 10 or 15% for the retention piece and having somebody actually service that. And of course that's different if there's 100% commission versus base plus commission or bonuses, and that's kind of a structure that you have to decide what makes sense from even from a cash flow perspective for your business. What does make sense with some of the ups and downs and such with that. So just off initial thought, anywhere from 10 to 25%. Frankly speaking, depending on experience is probably where that's going to shift. If you've got somebody that's very, very experienced and is going to provide lots of long-term value, where the client retention is maybe 2 years versus, it's a newer person, retention maybe is more like 6 months. Well, let's get that average up before we move you from 10 to 15% or 15 to 20% or whatever that looks like. But what is the skill set? What is the experience level, and being able to keep that retention? Because obviously the longer the retention, the greater the lifelong value for the client. And it's really just that investment back into keeping the clients and being able to service them. Same thing goes for the acquisition piece. If you've got someone that's very, very good, very experienced, and can bring on clients like nobody's business, obviously we're going to compensate them more than someone who's just trying to figure it out at this point. And they can always move up that scale as they get more experience, to get better at it. Maybe they hit some particular marks. As you'll noticed on, I think, some of the spreadsheets that we sent, there's metrics for how many owner conversations and how many strategy sessions, and then ultimately how many clients are enrolled. If we start seeing a team member that's goes from booking 3 strategy sessions a week to 5 or 6 or 7, and all of a sudden our conversion rate goes from 60% to 70% in enrollment. As we look at that every quarter, I'm going to look at ways to continue to compensate according to the fact that they're not only hitting the standards, but exceeding, and continue to push them and compensate them appropriately for that. Because when we look at it, if you've got somebody that's highly productive and very good, it's just like anything else within marketing. We're investing in the acquisition of new clients. And as long as there's that dollar in, multiple dollars out, then it makes a lot of sense to really go through that. But it can be a sliding scale. And that's kind of where I look at it, is you start what makes sense for the business and for the team member today with, and I know we do 90-day reviews. We don't wait 6 months or a year to do reviews. We do, essentially, I do a 90-day plan with all of our team members, that they set their own goals, things like that. So that we're going through each quarter and making that determination of how are we hitting the standard for the position versus kind of the stretch that they had set for themselves. Are they exceeding where they need to be? And then we can have some conversations on what that looks like in terms of increasing the percentage on commission. Maybe it's an increase in base. It just kind of depends on really what that person's looking for and what your business is set up to do. Morning, Corwin.
All right, makes sense. Actually, that was going to be my next question. It's like, because at some point you were saying that, it's kind of a grading scale, but then, yeah, it makes sense to do a review every 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, it gets adjusted. Now, do you go back to I mean, obviously, I mean, everything has to be legal and everything, but so so after the 90-day review, then then you make an adjustment to the contract, right? Obviously.
Yeah, as needed, and that's where those daily scorecards come in very handy. It's really what are the standards and the rules of the game for what that position looks like, and then making the adjustments according to how they performed. And ideally, they're coming to the meeting not saying, not with us as the leaders of the business going, well, you hit or you didn't hit, what happened, but they're coming saying, here's how I hit these marks, or here's why I didn't, here's what I'm going to do differently. As an example, when we bring on a new team member with those scorecards and such, we look at that daily for the first 90 days or so to really get them in that mindset of how do we continue to move you forward. We, at the end of the day, we want our team members to see success. We take care of the team, they take care of our business. So as we continue to help them move forward and keeping them accountable, again, taking it also, they're living above the point and taking ownership, then they can come back and that conversation becomes, here's how I'm going to make a difference next week to catch up, to start exceeding these marks or hitting these marks. And then that leads into kind of that 90-day conversation of, okay, here's what we hit. Here's what we've got coming up this next quarter. Let's have a conversation of what that looks like. What changes do we need to make? And that may involve some compensation changes, just depending on how that performance went and what they're looking for, what the business is set up for at that particular point, but always having that conversation and being transparent and all, at the end of the day, helping them succeed. Because when they succeed, the business succeeds.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Good pointers. Thanks.
You bet. Corwin, how are you doing this morning?
I'm pretty darn good. What's going on now? Good to see you this morning.
Morning, Corey.
Excellent. So I know you caught the kind of the tail end there, but we were talking a bit about setting up for team members. How do we, one, keep them accountable? How do we focus on compensation difference between acquiring new clients versus servicing the clients? Setting some of those and kind of going down that path. So that was really our discussion at this point. What's on your mind at this point? What's a top priority that you need to tackle in the next 2 weeks?
Top priority for me is figuring out kind of where the few members that I've got on this team that I've created, that the goal for them was ultimately to get me kind of moving to a higher and higher level, and that has just ultimately fell short. And I believe I've spent too much time on it. And so right now, in the next 2 weeks, I'm turning the corner to put back together the making of what it looked like last year, which is my programs, sticking to them. And, I was highly effective last year kind of doing this. And it wasn't necessarily a me, myself, and I thing like I told Andy, I think yesterday. But what I do have now is people to delegate to. And so in the last couple of days, I've contracted someone to do what I'm bad at in my business is paperwork, and I don't have the patience for processing things that take long periods of time. And so what I've done is I've put two people, one on the insurance side, one on the investment side, to handle that aspect for me. And then really over the last couple of weeks with Noah on the insurance side, we've put together this kind of step-by-step process. Overarching theme is I bring it in the door, he turns it into money, and I go collect the checks. And so we're ultimately, what I'm doing in the next 2 weeks is getting back to that and putting together kind of that defined plan that looks exactly like what happened last year and kind of kicking out the riffraff. But ultimately, I think I've got the people in place that I can delegate to take the most time consuming stuff that I'm bad at off of my plate to get me back to booking, 14 meetings a week and closing mad amounts of business.
If I heard you correctly there, you said that that's something you didn't have last year, correct? Is having those
Yeah,
people
I
that
did
can
it all
delegate to.
last year.
So
And
how does
that's
that
when, like,
how does
I
that
was
feel? How does it feel to have that having people that you know you can delegate to?
it feels really good because like I said, in this last little 6-month run where Noah's been developing very, very quickly on really the hardest part of this thing, which is getting people underwritten for life, disability, and long-term care. And he's been highly effective. And so I look at that and I'm like, I've got somebody that I delegate to, I can trust, that I know exactly what's going to happen. And we've got a system that, we were explaining it yesterday. We've got a system that the exact same thing happens, the exact same words. The messages are the same back and forth. And we've got it to where I don't necessarily need to respond, but every step of the way, I know exactly what's happening. And so that puts me at ease. And then I'm looking forward to getting that same comfortability with Liz, who is now brought in this week because of this kind of craziness that I've experienced with my mind over the last couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to getting that same or introducing that same kind of program, but ultimately I am no longer going to rely on the people I'm developing to do what I've asked them to do. I'm just going to go do it myself.
Okay. So when you look at putting this defined plan back in place, kind of reverting back and such, what do you see as the top 1 or 2 barriers to achieving that in the next 2 weeks?
The top 1 or 2 barriers, actually, we'll go with the top one, which is there is, and what I've experienced this year, which there's still a lot on the back side of this. Like the cases didn't get closed and with a no, I don't want to do business. It's just like it's a not this time. And so the biggest barrier to my success moving forward kind of in a fluid motion or even a linear motion is the fact that I can do the same thing and run this process that has worked for a very long time for me, but not everybody's going to be ready in the moment that I'm introducing these concepts to them to buy immediately. Like it just, you can do a whole bunch of work in this business and people just aren't necessarily ready to spend yet. And so then it's, keeping up on the backside of that, but that is the biggest barrier to, my linear success. Which linear is not a thing in business. It's a fallacy, but at the same time, I understand that if I do what I know how to do, I can book 10 meetings a week without much problem with the right people. And then as long as that rolls forward, my ability to track the progress, track everything that's, gotten a positive outlook or a positive outcome. Maybe it's not today, maybe it's next quarter. But between my research, my skills on the phone and then tracking through the backside with this smart office system that I use, it's not rocket science. It's just going and doing it and not letting anything kind of from a mental perspective or from an outside, I have no control over it perspective, get in the way.
Excellent. So now that you've got kind of those barriers identified, what would you say is the top action item that you need to take moving into next week to ensure that you're able to start overcoming some of those barriers?
So today actually is super unfortunate, but my 10:30, unfortunate for her, less unfortunate for me, but she thinks she got the COVID, so she will not be showing up 1 hour from now. And so there's still 2 meetings on the books to finish out the day, but the big one got moved to next week. And so, but hold on, what was the question? Oh, what am I doing to do this today? I am reblocking my calendar. And I'm going to block it back to what it looked like last year. And because, to be quite honest with you, these sales guys that I've got, they didn't show up this week. And actually, whenever I went back and ran the numbers, because I started them, at the beginning of last quarter, or ran the numbers all the way through to this quarter, and ultimately the time that I spent with them and them, I guess, not being committed to the process, whatever it was, cold calling people that you don't know and trying to convince them that you're the person to meet with and do some business planning with. That takes some guts to do it. And it is truly the hard part of this business. The rest of it's, technically hourly work, but getting back to blocking out my calendar today to resemble my kind of efforts on not only getting meetings, but then tracking those meetings and having it set up to where I don't have to think about it. I've got my action sheets, and that's something that I still do on a daily basis. However, I have not gotten anybody else to commit to that program. So again, just making sure that I understand kind of the talent that I'm working with and figuring out kind of how to best position them around me instead of between me and where I'm going.
Excellent. Well, the reblocking of calendar, I know that's just that time self-mastery piece I talked about earlier this week at another group I was a part of, and I think it's a relevant one that all of us can continue to work on. I know I just went through, as we built our plan for this next quarter, my entire calendar changed. I was challenged, I can't remember if I mentioned this on the call last week or not, but I was challenged to not only put my top or all the things that I need to get done on a business standpoint, but all the things I need to be doing personal. So family time, time for hobbies, time for exercise or whatever else it is, and put it up there so that we can kind of start building the calendar in the best use of our time. So when you go through and start reblocking your calendar, kind of building that new default back to what it was, what's your process for doing that? Do you have a process that you go through in terms of what needs to go on the calendar where?
Yes. Well, and so that comes down, it really boils down to setting meetings, running meetings, and understanding. Again, I've got a piece of paper on my wall over here on my door, and it was a week last year, I think in March or April, that I booked 17 meetings in a week, and I ran every single one of them. And it was an absolute nightmare. I will never do it again. And so making sure that I stick to ultimately what I know is accomplishable, and making sure that I don't stress myself out from that perspective or run myself so thin that I can't get anything else in the week accomplished. And then I think one of my biggest takeaways or one of my big takeaways from the 90-day planning session is just self-care, and making sure that I can stay kind of mentally strong, and not break whenever something just happens that is completely out of my control. And so, but that starts with making sure that, I'm working out enough, or especially early on in the week, because you get through a weekend, you jump into Monday. And if there's an hour-long workout for me, the first thing I do on Monday, the rest of the week starts out perfectly. And so making sure that I've got self-care. And then of course, when you're working, 10, 11 hours a day, and you've got to get work done, you got to get, exercise done. And like you said, hobbies done, I'm trying to become a better competitive golfer. And then of course I'm a married individual and my wife needs time as well. And that's really, really important to us. And so making sure that I take those things into account. But yeah, 55-hour work week, moving into another, add 5 or 6 hours for, my outdoor activities. And then making sure that there's always a date night and that we don't just see each other for 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the evening. And then it's, let's go do it again. So that's what I'm building into it. I think that I didn't even have last year because I worked my ass off last year. We made a lot of money. But that can't be at the demise of ultimately what I've created outside of this business.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Because I mean, when we talk about being in business, there's one thing that we talk about here in Action Coach that's very important. We've got to have some fun. right?
Yes, if
if
it's not
business
fun,
isn't
go do
fun,
something
then you
else.
shouldn't be doing it. So no, that's fantastic. And recognizing some of that, the difference between last year and this year in terms of what's important, what needs to be on the calendar is super important. Have you gone through with your spouse and gotten alignment on in terms of here's what you think the calendar needs to look like? Is she aligned with what that looks like? Have you gone through that
So
process?
in a way, so at the same time, we've got a bit of a double whammy going, which is I'm headed to a place in this business that I've created. And right now my wife's trying to make partner at the CPA firm. And so technically she works more hours than I do. And so, there was on Wednesday, girl worked till midnight. And so like that's one of the things where we have an understanding of kind of what we're trying to accomplish, and to be able to set aside the days. So in a way, to answer the question, in a way, we run calendars inside the house, so that everybody knows kind of what's going on. If there's anything going on that is like calendar based that's on my calendar, I send it to her work calendar just so that she knows it's happening. But beyond that, I think one of the biggest takeaways from the first 6 months of this year is that we both ran a busy season from January 5th, I believe was the first day of this year or work day of this year, all the way through the end of May was full-time work, no breaks. You're lucky to get a 2-day weekend. We typically work at the end of the day on Sunday. And so, but that's just kind of the dynamic right now. And my goal through this, like restructuring of the calendar and creating this time for us, is to make sure that we don't both burn out at the same time, because it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Or start to think that what we're doing is less desirable than it used to be. So yeah.
Excellent. And Mara, I know you've had similar experiences in terms of being fairly busy, for a good major chunk of this year. Have you gone through and done something similar in terms of kind of what the calendar looks like and having a default for this quarter as you move
Sign
forward?
it later. Yeah, no, for sure. Actually, now that I have time to get back to my normal life, yeah, that was one of the first things that I came across. It's like I'm still, I'm in the planning phase. I'm wearing this hat that, okay, we want to do this and that and here and there, but it's like it's all over the place. So I had to bring it back to that calendar and block chunks of time for each of the areas that we need to work on. So, and part of that is also, putting the personal side. I mean, you get up in the morning, you try to go through exercise, meditate, do some audibles, read, whatever, right? Take care of yourself, your personal development. And you got to put it into that same calendar because, everything, there's always every day, there's, you're going to end up putting off fires that you didn't even account for. You have your to-dos. I come in the morning, I have my list, and everything else, goes in a different direction. So, so yeah. As a matter of fact, I started working on that calendar this week because I can feel that it's all over the place right now.
Excellent. So with that, as you're building this calendar, do you have a goal set in terms of how closely you follow it, in terms of, are you following kind of that default calendar that you're putting together 70% of the time, 80% of the time? We know that 100% is a pretty difficult goal when it comes to, am I going to hit all these things all the time? Probably not. There are fires and other things that pop up.
Right.
But have you thought about putting a goal in terms of how closely you're following the calendar that you actually set forth?
I didn't think about in terms of setting up a goal and to see how close I get to that calendar. Now, what I did is I came up with the default calendar, but then I I pull a blank sheet that it has all the tasks, for the day, and I just and I'm sort of checking the box, right? I mean, okay, check, 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 and maybe it's going to be sort of a manual process, but if I have a lot of checks, I think it's going to be good. If I have a lot of X's, it's going to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think, no, that's a good point. I never thought about really putting some goal even behind that one, but yeah, that's a good pointer.
And one of the biggest reasons to do that isn't necessarily, am I following it, am I not, but it gives you some good optics on if I'm not following it. If I'm hitting it 40% of the time regularly, typically that's an indicator that, okay, we need to change the calendar. So my next challenge for both of you is your reblocking calendar, kind of building this piece out for the next 90 days beyond, is set some times in there. Maybe it's every 2 weeks, maybe it's once a month, but actually go in and say what needs to change on the calendar. If we're not hitting kind of what the standard is in terms of what we want on our calendar, then the calendar is probably set up wrong. And you need to move a few things around. It's okay to make those adjustments. We talked about that in 90-day planning and such as well. When you actually look week to week, it's really what does success look like at the end of the quarter, right? It's not totally about did I accomplish these these tasks perfectly each week, but if we didn't, how do we adjust so that we continue to achieve that long-term goal? I only share this because I went through this last quarter, and I went through and I set a goal of how closely I followed the default calendar, and sent my calendar to my coach every day for the entire quarter, and it was a great eye opener because I was probably hitting 50-60% on a regular basis, and we just continued to fine tune as the quarter went through, and then we were hitting pretty close to 85% by the end of the quarter. It did a lot to really open my mind in terms of what does the calendar need to look like, what is my true capability and capacity, and then at the end of the day, what are the most important, highest impact things that need to be on my calendar. So Corwin, for you, setting meetings, running meetings probably takes up a bulk of the calendar, but there's still other things that need to fit in there, and where those priorities are, how much time needs to be allocated per week. I encourage you to think through all of that as you go through and go through that exercise.
Yeah, that, and I guess turning into next week, I'm going to go back and run a 5-day time audit on myself again, like I did at the
Excellent.
first of last quarter, just to see where the time's getting wasted, if there is any. But yeah.
Excellent. Well, we are at 9:45, and I don't want to take up too much more of the time this morning, so you all can get back to your days and things like that. But I appreciate all three of you jumping on the call. It's a little bit different this week. My dad's on vacation this week, next week. I can't remember if he'll be back the following Friday or if it'll be that next Monday. So next Friday, probably the Friday after, I'll be kind of leading, facilitating these calls. So if you can make it back next week, love to see both of you here, all three of you here, sorry, Nafisa, and continue to drive these. And as always, share this with anyone. This is truly an open call. When it's a smaller group, we'll have a little bit more intimate discussions like we did today. When it's a larger group, we'll probably talk more about one or two topics and just kind of talk about it overall. But no, share this with anyone. This community is really where we continue to see those strides in terms of getting away from that lonely aspect of business ownership. The challenges we all face are different than those that aren't leading and running businesses, right? So making sure that we can continue to drive that forward and share experience and continue to take some action items into the next couple of weeks.